Bismillah. I'm going to get started here. We'll just read the book for the first 15-20 minutes, and then if anybody wants to come up after that, they can do their discussion like always. Today, we're going to be reading from pages 121 to 132. Okay, Bismillah. Understanding the soul. The intellectual tradition refers to the underlying substance of a human being as nafs, the basic reflexive pronoun in the Arabic language. The word is translated as self or soul, depending on context. In the philosophical sense, it designates the invisible something that makes its appearance in the cosmos wherever there is life, and hence it is ascribed to every living thing. Verifying the nature of soul was one of the most foundational activities of the Muslim intellectuals. A standard way to do so was to begin by investigating the apparitions of soul in the visible world. The visible realm is a conglomeration of bodily appearances, yet we constantly differentiate among them in terms of their modalities of appearance. We know the difference between living things and dead things precisely by the way they appear to us. Soul is the generic name for what shows itself when we recognize life and awareness. When we recognize these qualities in things, we simultaneously recognize them in ourselves. It is soul that knows soul. We know a living thing because we are alive, and we recognize a self-acting thing because we have self-activity. What we see outside, we find inside. Finding the external apparitions of soul is to experience the soul's presence to itself. Life and awareness are precisely properties that we find in ourselves, in the very act of discerning them in others. There are degrees of soul, which is to say that this invisible something is more intense and influential in some things than in others. As Tu Weiming writes about the Chinese understanding, rocks, trees, animals, humans, and gods represent different levels of spirituality based on the varying composition of qi. In the typical Islamic version, the qi, or invisible power, that animates rocks is called nature, tabiya. Only at the plant level is a second modality of qi, soul, added to the first. Nor are rocks only matter. In the hylomorphism adopted by the intellectual tradition, the role of matter, mada, is largely conceptual, because there is no such thing as matter per se. The name is given to an observed receptivity for the apparition of form, surah. Form itself is an intelligible reality that descends into the realm of appearances from the spirit or intellect, and ultimately from God, who is, in Quranic language, the form giver, al-Musawwir. Since all things are forms, there is nothing in the universe that does not manifest the living presence of intelligence and the intelligible. The classification of creatures into inanimate, plant, animal, human, and angel is one way of acknowledging different degrees of soul. The most complex and layered soul is found in human beings. Outwardly, this appears in the indefinite diversity of their activities, which clearly has something to do with vast differences in aptitude and ability. Because of the diverse and comprehensive powers of human souls, people can grasp and replicate all the activities that other modalities of soul cause to appear in the world. In discussing the human soul, the texts frequently elaborate on the intimate correspondence between soul and cosmos, which were understood in something like a subject-object relationship. The human soul is an aware subject that can take as its object the whole universe. So closely intertwined are soul and cosmos that, in Tu Weiming's term, their relationship can properly be called organismic. They can be understood as one organism with two faces. It follows that there can be no microcosm without macrocosm, and no macrocosm without microcosm. The vital cosmic role of human beings was always affirmed. It was recognized that the macrocosm appears before human beings, but it was also understood that the macrocosm is brought into existence precisely to make it possible for human beings to appear and for them to learn how to be human. Without human beings, or one can surmise analogous beings, there is no reason for a universe to exist in the first place. The teleology was always acknowledged. In the more religious language, This is to say that God created the world with the specific aim of crowning his achievement with human beings, who alone are made fully in his image and are able to function as his vicegerents. They alone can love God because they alone are able to embody every divine attribute. Genuine love demands loving the beloved for himself, not for something less than he. If one loves God with the aim of receiving some gift or benefit, such as avoiding hell and going to paradise, one has not in fact loved God, but the gift or benefit. This may sound like a Sufi idea, but notice what Avicenna, the greatest of the peripatetic philosophers, has to say about those who have entered the path of achieving self-knowledge. Knowers desire the real, the first, only for his sake, not for the sake of something else. They prefer nothing to true knowledge of him. Their service, ibadah, is directed only to him, because he is worthy of service, and service is a noble relationship with him. At the same time, knowers have neither desire nor fear. Were they to have it, the object of desire or fear would be their motive, and it would be their goal. Then the real would not be their goal, but rather the means to something less than the real, which would be their goal and object. In short, the only creature that can love God for God's sake alone, without any ulterior motive, is that which is made in his image. God created human beings precisely so that they can verify and realize their own divine images and love their Creator, thereby participating in his infinite and never-ending bounty. For the intellectual tradition, the purpose of studying the macrocosm is to come to understand the powers and capacities of the microcosm. I want to quickly add here, when he talks about the macrocosm, he's talking about the cosmos, and the microcosm is the soul, the nafs, or the ruh. I'll continue. By understanding the object, we simultaneously grasp the potentialities and abilities of the subject. We cannot study the natural world without learning about ourselves, and we cannot learn about ourselves without coming to understand the wisdom inherent in the natural world. Social reality was often studied for the same purpose, as an aid to understanding the human soul. It was not uncommon for Muslim philosophers to provide descriptions of the ideal society, but they were not interested in the utopian dreams which have so often preoccupied modern political theorists and which form the backbone of ideology. Rather, they wanted to understand and describe the various potentialities of the human soul that become manifest through social and political activity. They did not want to set down a program, but rather to illustrate to aspiring philosophers that every attribute and power of the soul, every beautiful and ugly character trait can be recognized in the diversity of human types. When seekers of wisdom recognize their own selves as microcosms of society, they can strive to know and realize the true sovereign of the soul, the real philosopher king, which is the intellect, whose duty is to govern both soul and body with wisdom and compassion. If the philosophers analyzed the souls of plants, animals, humans, and even angels, and if they described all the possibilities of human becoming in ethical and social terms, their purpose was to integrate everything into a grand hierarchical vision of Tawheed. It was self-evident to them that the intellect within us, the intelligent and intelligible light of the soul, is the highest and most comprehensive dimension of the human substance. The intellect alone can see, understand, verify, and realize. The intellect alone gives life, awareness, understanding, not only to our own souls, but to all souls. The intellect alone is able to grasp and realize the purpose of human life and all life. Origin and return. What then is this intellect that is the fountainhead and goal of intellectual learning? To define it is impossible, because intellect is the very understanding that allows for definitions. It cannot be limited and confined by its own radiance. However, we can describe it in terms of its role in cosmogenesis, whereby all things are created through it. And we can also depict it in terms of the human return to God, which can be expressed in its fullness only by the actualized intellect, which is the self-aware image of God. Let me deal with cosmogenesis first. The wisdom tradition typically discussed the birth of the cosmos as beginning with God's creation or emanation, of the first creature, which is called by names like intellect, spirit, pen, word, and light. Things appear from the one principle in a definite intelligible order and in keeping with the fixed and known hierarchy. Known, that is, to God and to the intellect, but not necessarily to us. It was obvious to Muslim thinkers that the one God creates intelligently, and that the first manifestation of his reality, the contingent being closest to his unity, the stage of created actuality nearest to his utter and absolute simplicity, is pure intelligence and awareness. Within this awareness are prefigured the universe and the human soul. The living intelligence is the instrument through which the real, with a capital R, ordered, arranged, and established all creatures, and it lies at the root of every subject and every object. It is a single reality that is the self aware and self conscious source of the cosmos and the soul. Among all creatures, humans alone manifest its full and pure light, a light that the Quran calls the spirit that God blew into Adam. Inasmuch as the fall, quote unquote, of Adam has a negative significance, it is nothing but the obscuration of this light. When we look at the intellect from the point of view of the return to God, we see that the goal of human existence is to remember God by recollecting the divine image within the self and awakening the intellect. The task of seekers is to recover in themselves the luminous consciousness that fills the universe. This recovery is the fruition and fulfillment of human possibility. Although the intellect is dimly present in every soul, human or otherwise, in human beings alone, it is a seed that can sprout and be cultivated, nourished, strengthened, and fully actualized. The human soul is a knowing and aware subject that has the capacity to take as its object the whole of cosmos and everything within it. However, it is typically blind to its own possibilities, and it takes on the color of souls that are not fully human. The soul needs to learn how to be human, and truly human activity does not come easy. Most of us have to be reminded about what being human implies. And even budding intellectuals, quote unquote, with all their gifts, have a steep and rocky road ahead of them if they are to achieve the goal. Part of the learning how to be human involves differentiating the qualities of the human soul from the qualities of other souls, which represent limiting and confining possibilities of soulish existence. The moral injunctions to overcome animal instincts rise up from the understanding that animals cannot manifest the fullness of intellectual and ontological possibility. This is not to denigrate animal qualities, since they play positive and necessary roles in the world and in the human makeup. The issue is rather one of priorities. People need to put things in their proper places. They must order the world and their own selves in an intelligent manner, and this means that they must understand everything in terms of the ruling truths of the cosmos. They must give to everything that has a haqq its haqq, and all things have their haqqs, both outside and inside the soul. The soul then is the subjective pole of manifest reality, and its counterpart is the cosmos, the objective pole. The soul in its human form has a unique capacity to know all things. However, the soul possesses only the potential to know all things, not the actuality of knowing. Actuality is a quality of the intellect. Every act of knowing actualizes the soul's potential and brings it closer to the intelligent and intelligible light at its core. But what exactly is the light of the soul's potential? What can it know? What should it strive to know? The intellectual tradition answers that there is no limit to the soul's potential, because nothing exists that the soul cannot know. The goal of learning is to know everything that can possibly be known. However, knowable things need to be prioritized. If you do not search for understanding in the right manner and the correct order, the goal will forever remain unattainable. If you do not give knowing its haqq, we will remain forever ignorant. As long as the soul remains occupied with the search for wisdom and has not yet actualized its full potential, it remains a soul. That is, an aware self with the possibility of achieving great awareness. Only when it reaches the actuality of all knowingness in the innermost core of its being, can it be called an intellect in the proper sense of the word. At this point, it comes to know itself as it was meant to be. It recovers its true nature and it returns to its proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. The philosophers frequently call the human soul a potential intellect, Aql bil Quwa, or a hylic intellect, Aql Hayulani, which is to say that it has the capacity to know all things. Only after it has ascended through the stages of actualizing its own awareness and achieving its own innate perfection is it called an actual intellect. Philosophers sometimes refer to the actualization of intellect by employing the Quranic terms salvation, najat, or felicity, sada. They would agree with Tu Weiming, who writes, salvation means the full realization of the anthropocosmic reality inherent in our human nature. For them, this anthropocosmic reality is the intellect that gave birth to both macrocosm and microcosm, and that is innate to the human fitra, omniscience. If the Muslim philosophers saw the quest for wisdom as a search to know all things, can we conclude that they were simply imitating Aristotle, who says as much as at the beginning of metaphysics? I think not. They would say that they are trying to live up to the human potential, and if Aristotle also understood the human potential, that is precisely why they call him the first teacher. They would remind us that the Quran discusses human potential in rather explicit terms. It tells us, after all, that God taught Adam all the names, not just some of them. They might also point out that this quest for omniscience is implicitly, if not explicitly, acknowledged not only by all of the world's wisdom traditions, but also by the whole enterprise of modern science. But from their perspective, omniscience can only be found in the omniscient. And the only created thing that is omniscient in any real sense is the fully actualized intellect, the radiance of God's own selfhood. Omniscience, in other words, can never be found in the compilation of data, the collection of facts, and the spinning of theories. It is not an objective reality, but a subjective awakening. Though no distinction can be drawn between subject and object, when one has actualized the very being of the omniscient. Nothing differentiates the Islamic intellectual quest from modern scientific and scholarly goals more clearly than the differing interpretations of the quest for omniscience. Both the Muslim intellectuals and modern scientists are striving to know everything, but the Muslim intellectual does so by looking at roots, principles, and noumena, and by striving to synthesize all knowledge and to unify the knowing subject with its object. In contrast, the modern scientist looks at branches, applications, and phenomena and strives to analyze objects, multiply data, and spin out theories. The traditional intellectual undertakes the quest for omniscience as an individual. He knows that he must accomplish the task within himself and that he can do so only by achieving the fullness of humanity, with everything that this demands ethically and morally. The modern scientist undertakes his quest for facts and information as a collective undertaking, knowing that he is one insignificant cog in an enormously complex apparatus. He sees omniscience as something that can be achieved only by the sacred enterprise of science, with its uniquely privileged methodologies and brilliantly sophisticated instruments. He rarely gives thought to the possibility that every knowledge makes ethical demands on the knower. If he does so not as a scientist, but as an ethicist or a philosopher or a believer. Traditional seekers of wisdom aim to actualize the full potential of intelligence in order to understand everything that is significant for human ends. And these ends are defined in terms of a metaphysics, a cosmology, a spiritual psychology, and an ethics that take ultimate reality as the measure of man. Modern seekers of facts aim to accumulate information and to devise ever more sophisticated theories in order to achieve what they call progress. In other words, they want to achieve a transformation of the human race on the basis of scientific and ideological pseudo absolutes. The quest for wisdom is qualitative because it aims at the actualization of all of the qualities present in the divine image and named by the names of God. The scientific quest for knowledge and theoretical prowess is quantitative because it aims to understand and control an ever proliferating multiplicity of things. The more the traditional intellectual searches for omniscience, the more he finds the unity of his own soul and his own organismic relationship with the world. The more the modern scientist searches for data, the more he is pulled into dispersion and incoherence, despite his claims that overarching theories will one day explain everything. The traditional quest for wisdom leads to integration, synthesis, and a global anthropocosmic vision. The modern quest for information and control leads to mushrooming piles of facts and the proliferation of ever more specialized fields of learning. The net result of the modern quest is particularization, division, partition, separation, incoherence, mutual incomprehension, and chaos. No one knows the truth of this statement better than the university professors, who are typically so narrowly specialized that they cannot explain their research to their own colleagues in their own departments, much less to colleagues in other departments. As for the claim that science will soon achieve a theory of everything, this everything is in any case defined in mathematical and physical terms. Such a theory can have nothing to say about the higher levels of being, the first of which is the being of the knowing subject, who declares himself the inventor or discoverer of the theory. By the necessities of its own presuppositions, science ignores that basic constituent of reality, that is the very self of the scientist. Appleyard makes the point nicely. Scientific knowledge is fundamentally paradoxical. The paradox is that all of science's truths about the real world are based upon the most flagrant distortion. In creating an understandable universe, we have committed ourselves to the most gross and obvious oversimplification. We have excluded the understanding mechanism, the self. Moreover, the whole enterprise is built on shifting sands of empirical observation and rooted in the imitation of finding of others, not first-hand knowing. How can anyone know anything firsthand when all depends on observations made through scientific instruments and calculations by computers? In short, for the Islamic intellectual tradition, the study of the universe was two-pronged: holistic enterprise. In one respect, its aim was to depict and describe the world of appearances. In another, its goal was to grasp the innermost reality of both the appearances and the knower of the appearances. The great masters of the discipline always recognized that it is impossible to understand external objects without understanding the subject that understands. This means that metaphysics, cosmology, and spiritual psychology were essential parts of the quest. The final goal was to see earthly appearances, intelligible principles, and the intelligent self in one integrated and simultaneous vision. It was understood that intelligence is not only that which grasps and comprehends the real nature of things, but also that which gives birth to things in the first place. Everything knowable is already latent within intelligence, because all things appear from intelligence in the cosmogonic process. The anthropocosmic vision allowed for no real dichotomy between the subject that knows and the object that's known. The structure and goals of the enterprise precluded losing sight of the ontological links that bind the two. To do so would be to forget Tawheed and to fall into chaos of dispersion and egocentricity. Ignorance of the reality of the knower leads to the use of knowledge for achieving illusory ends, and ignorance of the reality of the known turns the world into things and objects that can be manipulated for gold, cut off from any vision of true human nature. The possibilities of human understanding define the possibilities of human becoming. To know is to be. To ignore the reality of either the object or the subject is to fall into foolishness, error, and superstition. An impoverished and flattened universe is the mirror image of an impoverished and flattened soul. The death of God is nothing but the stultification of the human intellect. Social and ecological catastrophe is the inevitable consequence of psychic and spiritual disillusion. Cosmos and soul are not two separate realities, but the two sides of the same coin, a coin that was minted